In 1845, a British ship, HMS Birkenhead, named after the port in which she was built, crashed on rocks off the African coast. Only 193 of her 643, mainly military crew, survived. There were insufficient lifeboats, but Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Seton knew that rushing the lifeboats would leave the women and children to drown. He instructed his men to stand silent and orderly, and they obeyed. Now, all the women and children survived, and his command formed the basis of the women and children first ethos, which became the bedrock of Western civilization. We adults must always protect children, ours and everybody else's. But in 2022, on dry land, it can be surprisingly hard to pinpoint political or social decisions which put kids front and centre. I don't mean mollycoddling, indulging and telling them they've got rights. You can find a lot of that. I'm talking about opportunities for growth, good health, chances to build their inner confidence and self-belief. Frankly, opportunities to learn that life is tough, but they are tougher. The easiest place to start is education, of course. And yet, even after British schools endured longer COVID closures than any other European country bar Italy, we hear this weekend that hundreds of thousands of teachers are considering striking this winter. During the shamdemic, most children missed over half a year of in-person schooling, with the poorest at the most underperforming schools suffering the worst. When some of us questioned the cruelty of this policy, we were told that protecting the elderly from ill health was more important than giving children a school life and all that that encompasses: friendships, routine, hot meals, socialisation, sport and so on. I'm yet to meet an octogenarian who even supported that idea at the time. Furthermore, for the first time in history, a drug was then offered to children in the form of an injection, not for their own protection, as they were at a statistically tiny risk from COVID, but to protect the old and vulnerable in society. This subverted the tradition of putting kids first, and at that moment, I knew that humanity had entered a troubling new phase. Adults were prepared to use healthy children as a shield to protect themselves. The Us For Them organisation, who campaign for the well-being of children to be a guiding principle of public policy, say that lockdown consequences will live with some kids for life and extend far beyond educational attainment. They remind us that 100,000 children never even returned to the school system. They just disappeared from attendance registers up and down the country, and not one politician seems to care. Astonishingly, when the government announced that it would hold a COVID-19 inquiry to assess the measures taken, they didn't include any ambition to research the effects on kids. Eventually, under public pressure, they had to concede that taping off swing parks, telling children they could kill granny, enforcing long periods of screen time indoors and forcing them to cover their faces with masks in classrooms might just have taken a toll, which requires a little consideration. And I know that life can feel tough for us adults right now, and at today's party conference, talk will be of bankers' bonuses and homeowner costs. But spare a thought for the young. Public transport strikes disproportionately affect teenagers whose development and happiness relies on being able to get to college or meet up with friends, and they can almost never afford taxis or have their own cars. Food price hikes are brutal for the teenager treating themselves with money from a Saturday job. And yet, on the other side of this neglect is the paradox that too many adults cannot wait to label, pathologise and medicate young people for a whole manner of what used to be considered normal personality or emotional states. A cultural fixation on the mental health of children without any attempts to provide proven mitigating measures such as cheap and available sports facilities, youth clubs, music groups or other vital social settings which means that we are spectacularly failing our youth. Record numbers of children, including some of primary school age, are on medical antidepressants. Just think about that. I'll finish with another maritime tale. In 1884, 3 British men and a young cabin boy were charged with the task of delivering a yacht, the Mignonette, to Australia. But roughly 3 months after leaving from Southampton, high winds sank the vessel off the coast of Africa, leaving the crew in a tiny wooden dinghy without provisions. The adults decided to kill the cabin boy and eat him to survive. 4 days later, when they were rescued by a passing boat, they naively thought their plight would be understood and took the boy's body back for a Christian burial. They were eventually found guilty of murder. So in that instance, right and just morality did prevail. But let's hope that today's adults in positions of power will become more like the crew of HMS Birkenhead than that of the ill-fated Mignonette, because only in that case will we give our kids a fighting chance of a better future.